Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is ANN Profiles. Today we have with us Audrey Andersson. She serves as a General Vice President for the General Conference. Welcome, Audrey.
Thank you.
I have been looking forward to this one. I feel like I say that with a lot of people, but I have been asking you it's been a while, like 6 months at least.
Actually, almost 9.
Has it been almost 9? Okay, it's been a while. It took me a while. It took a while for you to get to America.
Well, it took 6 months to get a visa. And then with logistics and everything else, it took almost 7-8 months to get here.
So just because we're talking with each other, and in full transparency to the listening audience, Audrey is a special person to me because she is like a second mother and she is one of my personal mentors. So this is especially exciting for me because there's a lot of your life I don't actually know about. I actually just heard a little bit about it because we just had lunch with a bunch of student interns. But although you've been mentoring me and I see you as a second mother, I realize there's just a lot I don't know about you because we've actually really only known each other for about 3 years of my entire life. So Audrey, I'm excited because we're going to start at the very beginning. And I want you to tell me about where were you born?
Okay, I was born in Dublin, which is in the Republic of Ireland. So it's part of Ireland, but it's not part of the United Kingdom. And I usually say, and we'll unpack this later on, I'm Irish by birth. I am Swedish by choice and adoption. So we'll come to the Swedish bit a little bit later.
I'm excited about the Swedish bit because I am Swedish. So, we're going to get you over to Sweden as quickly as we can. No, all right. So you were born in Dublin. Now, tell us a little bit about your mom, your dad, your family.
Just before I was born, my parents became Adventists. And when they became Adventists, my dad lost his job. Family, friends really rejected them. The Republic of Ireland was very staunchly Catholic. They were Protestants, so they already were part of a minority. And, it was a case of people who they had gone to church with, who they had been friends with. They would see them coming and they would cross the road. Oh, so wow. It was, I have no recollection of it, but when I was born, listening to them tell the stories, it was a difficult time. But when I was 2, my dad took the momentous decision to leave Ireland and to go to Newbold College to train to be a minister. And so the first place that I really remember is Newbold College. And that always has had a special place. And I was absolutely devastated when I was about 4 years old. And my sister told me with great delight, "You're not British, you're Irish."
Like, no, I am British.
So, that's maybe where my mixed up identity began.
Okay. All right. So you grew up, much of your formative years then were?
I was a typical pastor's child. My dad left Newbold after taking his BA. He went first to Belfast, spent 3 years in Belfast, 3 years back in Dublin. He then moved to Hull on the east coast of England. He pastored there. He pastored Hull and a little town further north, Scarborough. And then he moved to Leeds in sort of centre of England and team pastored Leeds, Bradford and Halifax. And then he decided that he wanted a change. And so my sister by this stage had gone off to university and my parents and myself moved to Canada. And he started working as a pastor in Riverview in Canada.
Where's Riverview? Which
I'm just saying. I'm saying it's New Brunswick.
Okay. That's a really beautiful area.
It was wonderful, and it was the most amazing experience. All of us loved Canada. I lived there I finished high school in Canada, and then I thought I would do 1 year at Newbold before going to Canadian Union College or Andrews or somewhere. So I started my degree in Newbold.
Oh, we're getting way ahead.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna get to Newbold here.
Okay.
Let's finish.
Okay.
I was like, well, this could be a very short episode if we already are at Newbold. I feel like we have a lot of years we're gonna get through here. All right. So your dad was not a pastor, becomes a pastor in your young years, and then you become a pastor's kid.
And that is the only life that I really ever knew. That, we would move literally every 3 years. At one stage, my parents worked out they had moved something like 22 times in about 30 years.
What did your mom do?
My mom was the most amazing woman. She worked to keep everything together at home. But she also, wherever she went, she was an office manager, secretary. She would go in. Oftentimes she'd begin doing temping jobs, and then she was very good at what she did. She was always offered a permanent job or got a permanent job. And always, as she began to rise within the organization, it was, oh no, we've got to move again. So, my mom really is the unsung hero of our family, because she was the one who kept us together, made sure that everything happened, but also she worked part-time, which was necessary. A pastor's salary, 2 girls. I have a sister.
So obviously then you were raised Adventist. Did you go to Adventist primary schools and secondary schools?
No. I have one term at an Adventist primary school. So that was at Newbold. And anyone who knows Hope Channel and knows the president of Hope Channel, Derek Morris, his dad and my dad were students at Newbold together, and they lived across the corridor from us. And so Derek was one of the big boys who took me to school. So, yes, just a little bit of...
That's cute, actually. I can actually see that in him. He's just kind of like one of those kind of cute men that it's like I could just totally see him as this young man walking all these kids. I don't know why I can just totally see that. All right. So after that, you were in public school?
After that, so basically all my school was done in public school. And so in the UK, school doesn't get out until 4, which meant that on Fridays we would have to ask to leave early. And when I was younger, I played a French horn, and so played in the orchestra. But whenever there was anything on a Friday night or something on Sabbath, didn't go. So from as long as I can remember, there was always the learning how to articulate why I wouldn't join in certain activities on a Friday night or on a Sabbath. And also, although my parents would always ask the school, there always was an element of you yourself are the one who has got to get up and leave the classroom, or has got to say, remind the teacher when it gets to that time of the year, I will be leaving early on Friday, and this is the reason why.
So just out of curiosity, were you ever resentful about this?
No. I can't remember ever being resentful, because to me it was how it was. It was how it was. It was part of my DNA. It was, this is the way these things are. Of course. So, yeah.
I'm just curious because, like, different people, as you're growing up, you have different experiences where sometimes it's more of like the parents are wanting it and, you're wrestling with it yourself. So for you at this point, though, you've already internalized this is who you are as well. So it makes total sense for you to ask for these accommodations.
For me, it was just a no-brainer. I was, this is what it is. Perhaps when we moved to Leeds, I may have been sort of getting towards a rebellious stage or questioning stage. But then I went to school. It was a co-ed school, but it had been a girls' school and a boys' school. So the year that I went into was the last year that was still separate. So you had girls' classes and boys' classes. They hadn't merged them. And the particular class that I went into, it was divided, and they called themselves the God Squad and the Heathens. And the God Squad were girls who were involved in the Christian Union in the school. And I actually thought that the others looked a little bit more fun. But when they heard that my dad was a pastor, it was, well, you just belong to the God Squad. But, that year getting involved with the Christian Union at school was transformative for my own Christian experience. And so for me, I saw that as God leading in my life and making sure that he brought me on the path where I could be prepared for what was going to happen, because the next stage was this move to Canada, and that was quite traumatic. It was I had culture shock when I moved, just the difference between England and Canada. But this experience of having developed this very personal experience with God was really one of the things which carried me through.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because you said the Christian Union was very transformative. What was it about it that created this closer connection with God? What was it that the Christian Union did? The God Squad. What about being in the God Squad brought this faith connection?
Every morning, they had a prayer meeting at the beginning before school started. So instead of hanging around the playground, they had access. And then they also had Bible studies after school, one night a week. And then most of them belonged to a Baptist church. And so I would sometimes go to their study group on a Sunday evening. And it was just the genuineness of the openness of studying. And it was very refreshing. We had always grown up in churches, or Dad had always pastored churches, where my sister and I were sort of the only two young people. And all of a sudden this was, here were lots of young people who were very passionate about their faith. And although we had discussions on the differences between what Adventists believed and what they believed, there was still this fellowship and this richness, which was for me quite transformative.
So at the end of this year, at the end of this time in Leeds, your dad announces you're moving to Canada. Canada.
He made an independent transfer to Canada.
What does that mean?
That means that you go under your own steam and they pick you up when you get to Canada. So he moved to Canada with 20 tea chests, which are basically large wooden boxes, of which 18 were books. And that maybe says a lot about the way I grew up. We never had a television, but we always had lots of books.
And from seeing your office today, this is not stunning to me because I can tell you love your books.
Well, I thought this when I was packing up and moving from the UK here, and when they were delivering my boxes, the removal men said to me, what exactly do you do? Nobody we know has this many books.
So that's me.
So yeah, I think that I kind of got that in the genes and in the DNA as well.
So you move with a lot of boxes of books.
We moved to Moncton, New Brunswick, was the actual town, and I went to Riverview High. So we moved to Moncton, and that was just, again, an amazing experience. The members were incredible. While my dad was there, he had a radio program, a little local TV program, made lots of contact. It was a very rewarding kind of experience, very rich church life.
Now, were there young people?
There were young people. And it was a very different kind of experience.
You said it was a culture shock. What about it was the most shocking?
It was just a different lifestyle because teenagers, you learnt to drive, which was something in the UK. You maybe do that in your 20s, but not as a teenager. And shortly after we got there, it was snowing, and my mum and dad were walking home, and one of the neighbours stopped and said, "You must be the English people who moved to Moncton." And my dad said, "How did you know?" "Well, you're only an Englishman would go walking in in the snow, sort of just weather, the way of getting around. Everything was
different.
It was just so different.
So how many years were you in Moncton?
Just a couple, just 2.
Okay. So, but at this point, you're starting to think through college.
Yes. Well, I finished high school, and I decided at that stage we were planning to stay in Canada. And so, but I had this, Newbold was the first place I remember. Dad had gone to Newbold. I really wanted to go and spend a year at Newbold. And so I went to Newbold for a year.
So as you're leaving high school, you have to make the decision that all of us have to make. What am I going to do for the rest of my life? Which is such a great thing to have an 18-year-old kid make. Like, for the rest of my 60, 70 years of existence, I'm going to make this decision right now. So as you're going into this, in your brilliance, what did you decide you were going to do?
I didn't.
You didn't?
No, I didn't. I just thought
you're going to go to college.
I would go to college. I would take my first year, which is lots of general ed at Newbold, and then I would really sort of, it was maybe teaching, maybe I really wasn't. I wasn't 100% certain, but I went to Newbold, and I actually enrolled in theology just because that gave me the general ed it gave me the most options and ability to transfer, because at that stage Newbold was affiliated with Columbia Union College in just down the road, which is now Washington Adventist University. And so that was what I started out doing.
So the thought was you're going to spend a year and then transfer to another school.
Yeah, probably Canadian Union College, but
which is
maybe
now
Berman University. Yes.
So you don't transfer, though, I'm gathering.
No. What happened was there was a family issue came up. My parents didn't really know what to do, whether to come. My dad had got a call to go to California. So it was, do we go to California? Do we stay here? Do we go back to the UK? he really, it was one of those times where I think most people have these times in life where you just don't know where you Lord, what do I do? Where do I go? What is the best decision for me to make for my family? And then out of the blue, he got a phone call from the British Union inviting him to come back and to pastor in London. And my parents took that as a sign that they should go back to the UK. And so we moved back to the UK. And on a British salary, it was totally out of the question to go to college in North America. And by this stage, I had taken enough theology classes to know that I actually liked theology, and this is what I really wanted to do. And so I completed my BA in theology at Newbold, but the degree came from Columbia Union College. So
because I'm working on my degree in pastoral ministry, what was your favorite class? Like, what was it that, like, all of a sudden, like, yes, I love theology. Do you have a moment or a class or a teacher, something that you want to share just about that experience? That, because I'm watching your face light up as you're talking about it. So obviously it was very special. What was it about it?
It was just the ability to spend all that time studying the Bible, learning new things. It was just so rewarding. I mean, there was just nothing that could be better. And I just loved it. And I was really, really glad that was what I chose.
What was your favorite class? It's okay. We don't have to tell the other teachers that. What was the class that stood out to you? It doesn't have to be your favorite, but one that stood out to you.
Well, I think Life and Teachings of Christ was definitely one of my favorites. I love church history. Just seeing the hand of God, sort of getting a long perspective. Mm-hmm. Daniel and Revelation. I don't know.
She's like, I like them all.
I do.
It's like having to pick a child. I can't pick a child. That's fair. Okay. Actually, that every time I take another class, I'm like, oh nope, this one's not my favorite. Oh man, it's like I love them all. So I totally understand.
Yeah. So
it's okay. I won't make you have to pick then.
Good.
So you finish with a degree in theology.
I finished with a degree in theology.
And what are you going to do with this?
And then I take 2 semesters towards a master's. And that's as much as I can do at Newbold. And at the time, I'm going out with someone who's also trained to be a pastor. And I applied to work as what then was called an associate in pastoral care. And I go for an interview, and the interview I thought went quite well. And then I get a letter of employment, and it's not as an associate in pastoral care, it's as a Bible worker. Now, a Bible worker's course at that stage was a year less than the degree in theology, and you didn't have to do Greek, and you didn't have to do some of the other courses. And I am ashamed at this stage to admit this, but with the arrogance of a 20-year-old, which is, I just wrote back to the conference and said, thank you, but no thank you. I don't want to do this because I trained to be an associate in pastoral care. I didn't train to be a Bible worker. And no, thank you. And so then I went out to look for a job. Now, a degree in theology proves essentially to the outside world, I can read and write my name, and that's about it. So I got a job for a secular publishing company in their sales and marketing. And it was a privately owned company, commercial property. But if you take the universe of business publications in the UK, this privately owned company stood for about a third of the profit.
Oh, wow.
So it was a very, very successful magazine. And my job was to help think up ideas to sell the magazine. And I did that for a number of years. And I took a mission trip with the Trans-European Division out to Pakistan.
What were you doing on the mission trip?
We were building 2 churches
Okay.
out in villages. And just being out in the villages, seeing poverty like I had never seen, and just experiencing the difficulties of being a Christian in that environment. It made me stop and rethink, and I thought, actually, I can do more with my life than just think up ideas to sell a magazine. And so I went back and I said to my boss, I think I want to find something else to do. And he said, let's not be hasty. Now, when I had started working there, he thought I was a little bit of an oddity because I had asked for Sabbath privileges and to finish early on Friday in the winter. And the deal had been, yes, we will employ you, but you cannot talk about your religion. And I said, it's fine. But he and I had become very good friends, and we had talked about all kinds of things because he was on his own spiritual journey, and his wife had gone back to church. And so he was now caught at home between a wife that was having a vibrant spiritual existence and this woman who worked with him who, what did you do at the weekend? Well, I was, at church we did this and we did that and we did the other. And so anyway, so he said, well, let's not be hasty. And he talked with the owners and they liked me as well. And so they said they would give me an option of 3 different alternatives. One was to manage their property portfolio. The other was to train to be their advertising manager, or to train and become a legal editor.
What's a legal editor?
Well, if I just back up a little bit and I'll tell
let you back up. Back up all you want.
I decided I didn't want advertising because that involved a lot of partying, entertaining, alcohol. I felt that didn't align with who I was. Managing property portfolios seemed interesting, but I had a friend who was a CFO, and he said, no, take the job as the legal editor. Now, it was a weekly magazine, and so it had a legal section reporting law reports in full to do with property, commercial property. And so it was learning to order and choose and edit them for publishing in the magazine, then publishing law reports which would be cited in court. And then it was just the beginning of sort of online services and things like that, which I understand today sounds like positively, sort of back in the Stone Age.
Ancient.
And so I had the privilege of helping to set up an online daily news service from the High Courts. And so we had an internet-based service. We had weekly reports. We had full reports. I edited a series of 4 law reports and had a team of about 20 lawyers who worked for me in the High Courts and in other capacities.
That's a lot different from theology.
Actually, no. It's quite the legal mind and the theologian's mind are actually very similar.
In what ways?
Well, if you look, theologians in the past argued about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. The lawyers will argue the same kind of thing. The disciplines that you use in looking at theology and studying are actually very similar to the legal disciplines. So no, the obvious thing isn't there, but the mindsets are actually quite similar.
So you serve as in this role for how long?
Oh, I don't know, 5-6 years.
What is your connection with the church at this time?
At this time, I'm very active in the church. I'm an active lay preacher. I serve on the conference executive committee.
You're pretty young still.
Yes.
Right? And you're serving on the conference executive committee. Okay. I mean, I'm very pro this. I'm just pointing it out to our listening audience here. So,
my dad was, he worked in the conference at this stage, a Sabbath school director. So he and I would go around and I would run workshops for children's Sabbath school, and he would run workshops for adult Sabbath school. And then somewhere in here, I produced a video on how to run a VBS for the division. So, I was very involved in what was going on.
Okay. So what happens next?
What happens next?
You're like, well, I end up at the GC. No. So what happens? So you're serving this function, but we're getting near to the end. So what do we meet people? I kind of know where this is landing. So you go to an Adventist young people's group thing, maybe.
Okay. At this stage, the Trans-European Division ran what they called a young adults camp, which was for young professionals, 25 to 35. And someone suggested I go, and I sort of went kicking and screaming, but I went. And I met or made friends with a group of young people from Scandinavia, from continental Europe. The division stopped doing these camps, but there was a very loose group of about maybe 25, 30 of us that would meet up a couple of times a year. And in this, I would hear them talking about this guy called Lars. But when he went and when I went, if he was there, I wasn't. And if I was, but we knew of each other's existence. And the very first camp that I went to, there was a picture of the group, and he was actually standing behind me. And we did remember later on that we had talked, but at that stage, his English he wasn't very confident in English.
Where was he from?
He was from Sweden. So,
since we heard your little thing at the beginning about being adopted by Sweden, I think we know where this story is going to go, but we'll keep going with it.
Okay. So after this loose group has met up for, I suppose, about 4 or 5 years, one of the girls who I was very friendly with, Jeanette, lived in Sweden. Parents had a little island where they had a boat repair business, but on the island there was also a house in the 1700s, which was this huge rambling place. And she invited everybody to go and spend a week there. So I went, spent the week, and was going to spend another couple of days in Sweden. And at the weekend, Lars turned up. And, he seemed nice, but yeah, he came. On the Sunday, everybody else went. And so Lars, Jeanette, myself, and another friend from the Netherlands we're all going back to her apartment, and then we were going to do something for the afternoon. Jeanette, the Dutchman, and I were in one car. Lars was in the other. And the Dutchman was very keen on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And
Motorcycles?
Motorbikes.
Okay, yep.
And so every time he would hear a motorbike, he would go, Japanese fake. Or Harley-Davidson.
Were there a lot of motorbikes?
There were a lot of motorbikes.
So you were hearing this a lot?
I was hearing this a lot.
Okay.
And yeah, I got to the stage where I thought, I'm going to say something that probably I shouldn't say. So we stopped at some traffic lights and I said, actually, this is unfair. There's 3 in one car and 1 in another. And I got out and went and sat beside Lars in his car, who looked at me like a frightened rabbit and just, And so we started to talk. And I did think, because my friend Jeanette was rather sweet on him, I did think I needed to talk to him and just convince her that he wasn't anything special.
I don't feel like this is going to go that direction. Maybe it's the blushing that's happening on your cheeks right now that tells me that this is not how the story ends.
So anyway, I should say at this stage, Lars is a farmer. So he lives 2.5 hours from Stockholm in the middle of nowhere. And as we know at this stage, I'm working in the West End of London, loving my job. So we come from polar opposites. Is it enough that I just say that 2 years later we got married?
We'll let you get away with that because we have more to your life story than this. But I know that there's some other fun adventures that go in there, and your cute smile means that if anybody else gets a chance to talk to Audrey, you need to ask her about her proposals. And I said that plurally. Anyways, but we won't make Audrey have to relive both of her proposals. So,
okay, you cannot leave that. My poor long-suffering husband, by Christmas was sure that he wanted to marry me. He recognized it would take me a little bit longer. And in the May, he did propose and I said yes. And then the next day I said, I don't know that I can do this. It was just such a huge move. And he was just,
because it's not just
fine.
him. It's talking about moving countries
it's
and
talking
changing everything.
It's talking about giving up my then well-established career. It's talking about moving to a totally different country, learning a new language, and going and being a farmer's wife. And he was just so, that's fine. I'll ask you again. And he did. And I really didn't deserve it, but he did. And he took me to the most romantic place. It was the beginning of a youth congress in Budapest. Took me up to this most romantic place, the Citadel, overlooking the river and everything else. Went down on one knee, did everything. It was storybook perfect. And I said yes. And I said, please just get up. Because I was terrified that someone from the Youth Congress would come around the corner. And yeah, I know. But
it's okay,
hey.
Audrey, because I can tell madly in love, we're good. So you end up marrying Lars. You move to Sweden. Mm-hmm. So what do you do for a job now?
Well, when I told the company that I was moving to Sweden, they said, no problem. They put in, and again, this we're going back in time. They put in an ISDN line, which is a precursor to a fast internet, and they set up an office. So I work.
So this is remote working before it was popular.
This is remote working before the pandemic, before it was popular. So I would spend 10 days in London and then 2 weeks at home, and 10 days in London, 2 weeks at home, and I did that for 5.5 years. I then, after about 4.5 years, I said to my husband, this is getting a bit old. But it took a year to make the transition happen. And then I set up my own communications business. And I worked mainly with IT startups and Sony Ericsson, people like that, doing translation, marketing. So taking stuff from Swedish and translating it into business English. During this time, I was very active in the church, and I had been involved in writing some of the GraceLink material,
which is the Sabbath school curriculum for little kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when that was finished, I prayed a prayer and I said, Lord, up to 50%, what would you like me to do? And I forgot about it. And a month later, I got a phone call. And the phone call was from the union president, the Swedish union president. At this time, I'm sitting on the union executive committee. And we're 18 months out from a session. There'd been an issue, and the secretary and the treasurer had resigned. And as an executive committee, we had said we wanted to find a secretary treasurer, so one person instead of two. And after asking 23 people, they finally got someone who said yes to be the treasurer, but he was very clear he didn't want to be the secretary. And so the union president said to me, we would like to invite you to be the union secretary, 50%. So I said I needed to pray about it. I needed to talk to Lars and I'd get back to him. So I phoned Lars and I said, you will never guess what's just happened. So I told him and he said, well, of course you're going to say yes. And I said, well, actually, I was thinking of saying no. And he said, well, how can you? And I said, well, I'm not Swedish. I mean, I live here. I speak the language.
You look Swedish.
But
so there you go.
But, I open my mouth and people know that I'm not Swedish. I don't always think like a Swede. I know how Swedes think, but I don't always think as a Swede. And, the clincher is we live a 2-hour train ride from the office, and I would be away preaching and doing things at the weekend. And he said, and? What's that got to do with anything? So he said, you already go to Stockholm to see clients, so that's really not an argument. And I'm more than happy to come with you every weekend that I'm not milking. At this stage, we had 400 cows. So why not? And I did remember my prayer, but I thought I have a get out of jail free card. So I phoned my dad, who, is a free card.
We already know you're not going to get out of jail because you're here, but keep going with this.
So, he was a pastor, and but he was quite resistant to the idea of women pastors. And so I said, Dad, I've had this offer, and you should do it. I think, doesn't make sense to me, but you should do it. So I go back to the nominating committee.
So get out of jail free card is really much like a go past go card.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a reason why I don't have to do this. So anyway, I go back and I say to the nominating committee, all the things I've said, and they say yes, we thought of all those things. So I become the secretary of the Swedish Union with 18 months to the session. 50% didn't stay 50%, but the Lord knew if he'd asked 100%, I'd have said no. So I was elected again in 18 months' time, and then 4 years later, elected again. And
so you're serving now as the executive secretary of the Swedish Union. What exactly does an executive secretary do?
Well, an executive secretary looks after all the legal things, then looks after the membership, looks after statistics, archives, policies, processes, works with the pastors, does HR.
So what I'm hearing is that you trained to be in theology, to be a pastor. Then you went and learned how to lead teams,
Mm-hmm.
and you led people in law.
Mm-hmm.
And now God is calling you to mix all of these talents that he has helped you to accrue to use for his church.
Yeah. I mean, I can honestly say everything that I had done and all the management training that I'd had when I was working in the publishing company and all this, the experience of running my own business, because I also, in addition to being executive secretary, became responsible for communications, media, and women's ministries.
And I'm a big fan of communication.
Yeah,
serving in it. So I'm just saying, you know.
So that's
a lot of things too.
Yeah, but you know, small unions, you wear multiple hats, and I absolutely loved it. And of course, I got to preach. I got to help pastor. I got to work with pastors, to mentor, to do all these kind of things. So it was amazing. 2010, GC session, 9:00 at night, I get a phone call. And it's from Dr.
Wait, this is at GC session.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I'm not at the session. I'm at home. A lovely summer's evening. And it's Bertil Wiklander, who was then the president of the Trans-European Division. And he said, we would like to invite you to be the executive secretary of the division. And
because these positions are actually voted at GC sessions. Okay.
And you have 10 minutes to make up your mind.
Because 10 minutes is such a logical amount of time to make a life-changing decision.
Well, you know, they were waiting to announce all the division secretaries. So, yeah, you know. We actually took 2 hours.
You know, I'm going to be honest. I never actually pondered that because I was at the last GC session. If you're not there, for some people, they could be asleep.
Yeah.
That you're calling, and never even crossed my mind that could become complicated as far as time zones go with calling people.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was just a very random thought that hit me. Anyways, so you took 2 hours instead of 10 minutes?
Took 2 hours. As I was talking to him, Lars came in and he worked out what I was being asked, and I put down the phone and I looked at him and he said, well, what are you going to say? And I said, well, you know, it's such an honor. It would be such a privilege, but, you know, the answer's got to be no. And he said, why? And I said, well, the answer's got to be no, because you can't move a farm from the middle of Sweden to the UK. So, you know, it's not going to work. And he looked at me and he said, well, I think you should do it. And I will do anything necessary to support you and to make this happen. So we talked some more and we prayed and we walked the 2 minutes up the road to talk to his parents. And then we came back and then I phoned my parents. And, yeah, as I said, my dad was no fan of women in leadership. And so I said, Dad, you know, I've had this question and Lars and I are talking and praying about it. What do you think? And without missing a heartbeat, he said, if you say no, you're saying no to the Lord. He said, I don't understand this, but he said, you can't say no. So I phoned back and I said yes, and spent the next 12 years at the Trans-European Division.
So, I mean, you've already been in England, so this isn't like a huge change of location-wise.
No, it was. It you know, moving from England to Sweden was a huge change because different language. I complained bitterly about the bureaucracy, about the foods I couldn't find and everything else. 12 years later, Lars just kills himself laughing because now I am struggling to find the foods that I want. I'm complaining about the UK bureaucracy because I've forgotten what it's like. And he said, you're just complaining about everything in reverse. So there was an adjustment. And I was eternally grateful that my two fellow officers, the president and the treasurer, Bertil was Swedish and the treasurer, Johan Johansson, was Icelandic Norwegian, because I would find myself thinking in Swedish and thinking, I can't remember what the English word is. But I could just say it in Swedish and they both understood exactly what I meant. So it was good.
That's kind of intriguing. So you start now though traveling all over Europe, because now you're at a division level. It's very different. So tell me about, I believe it's Cyprus.
Yes. 2016. I've just been re-elected to serve another, we thought 5 years, but it was ended up being 7. October 23rd. I've just been there for the weekend for some executive committee meetings, and in the morning I talked with Lars, and we were planning to, he was going to be truck driving during the week and we were planning to meet in Stockholm at the weekend. I'm just about to get on the plane and I get a phone call, and it's from my sister-in-law. And she just said, Lars is dead. He'd been killed in an accident. Just one of those random things that happens. And so, so began a different journey. And there's a lot that could be said about that. But what I will say is, I have seen the goodness of God over the last 6.5 years. I cannot complain. Would I like Lars to be here? Of course I would. I would give anything for him to be here. But I can honestly say that the Lord has been so good, so gracious. I can do nothing but praise God and say thank you for the way that he has been with me.
So I remember when you told me this story, and I want to give a special, not a shout out, but to the man who stood by your side during this, because getting that kind of news is devastating, let alone to be in a foreign country trying to figure out how you're going to get back. And there was somebody who stood by your side at this time.
My associate secretary, Dean Papuano, was amazing. He had been with me during the meetings, and he was just incredible. I was just crying. I mean, I didn't know which way was up. We were literally waiting to board, and that poor man, he put up with me crying for the next 5.5 hours till we got back to the UK, and then my parents had arranged for me to fly out early the next morning, and then I went to Sweden and dealt with everything that needed to be dealt with.
So, knowing how much you loved each other, like I reckon this leaves a hole, and he's been such a strong supporter of yours. Mm-hmm. Like when you've doubted God's call, he's made it very clear that God's calling you.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And he's encouraged you to serve and to lead in the church. And he's stood by your side very faithfully. And so now he's gone. Mm-hmm. And you come back to England. you stay with your parents
No.
for a while?
No.
Nope. So where
we had a home base in the UK, and so I was at home. And I cannot say enough about the Trans-European Division family. And it is a family. It was a family in the office. It was a family in the unions. And each one of them played a part in helping me come to terms and learn to grow and to flourish. And that really was it was a gift from God. It really, really was. And I've told the story oftentimes, but about 6 months after Lars died, Easter Sunday, so talk about resurrection, and I was out for a walk, and I saw a cherry tree that was in full bloom. And having just come back from Washington, when it had been a very bad year, 2017 was not a good cherry blossom year, at least not while I was here.
Okay.
And so, I see this wonderful cherry blossom, so I stopped to take a picture. And then I realized it's a tree that had been damaged. And Lars and I had walked this walk, and half the tree had fallen off, and he was a forester, and he said that tree's going to die, and there it was, and it was flourishing, and it was a case almost like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, you're like that tree. You're scarred, you're damaged, but you can still flourish, you can still blossom, you can still serve me, you can still do something beautiful for me. And that to me is what I want. I want to be like that tree that's rooted and grounded in God, and blossoms and flourishes and shows his goodness and shouts out his goodness to the world, because God is good and he's just amazing.
Amen. So 2023? Are we in 2024?
No,
I'm going to tell you, the pandemic has totally messed up time. Do you ever feel that way?
I think you want to go to 2022 in St. Louis.
Oh, yeah. See? I don't even know what year we're in. I just said 2023. We are in 2023.
We're in 2023, yeah.
Apparently, I just skipped a year in my life right there. So 2022. 2022, yes.
Yep.
Okay. We come to St. Louis, and you come because you're an executive secretary. You're there as a delegate.
Yes.
This is one of the first times we actually really meet.
Yes.
In real life.
And so I have prayed a prayer before the GC session, because when you get to any kind of session, one of three things is going to happen. You're going to go home with the same job, a new job, or no job. That's it. There are only those three outcomes if you hold an elected position. And so I prayed and I said, Lord, whatever door you open, I will say yes and I will go through. I did not see the Lord opening the door that he did. It was not on my radar. I didn't see it. But that was the door he opened, and with fear and trepidation, I walked through it. And I know that the goodness of God is not going to fail.
It took you a couple more months to get over here. What a lot of people don't realize is when you get elected, it generally is a very it's starting then kind of a position. But for many of you who are coming from overseas, there's visas and all this other stuff that we have to work through. So even though you were voted in as a general vice president, your name couldn't be listed on any websites and you couldn't be invited in that position to many things until you had visas go through. And obviously you have to close out your lives basically in a country. You were living with your mom at this point.
At this point, I was staying with my mom. I still have my home in the UK. And so that was division housing. So I had 6 weeks to close that out. I continued to stay with my mom for a while. Everything was being processed. And yeah.
And now
she
is finally here. She now gets to get a driver's license and all the fun things.
All the fun things of looking for houses, taking my driving test again, and yeah. So your daughter and I can do driver's ed together.
Yes. My daughter's taking driver's ed right now, and Audrey and her have been talking about that they have to take the test together and they have to do the on-road driving. It's going to be great fun. Maybe I could give driving classes to both of you. Maybe she'll do better in the car with me if that's the case. So you're called as a general vice president. You're actually the second female to serve in this position. What was that moment like when you get this official call? Is it Elder Wilson who calls you, or is it someone from the nominating committee who actually calls and says, "Hey, Audrey, by the way, we'd like to ask you to serve"? Who actually makes that call to you? Can I ask? Is it a secret?
No,
okay.
You can't ask.
Okay, never mind. All right, we're not going to ask that one here. No. But what emotionally, what is that like? Because as you said, you either go back with the same position, no position, but there's a good chance you could be called to the General Conference. As you said, you weren't expecting this call.
No. I mean, I spent 20 years in Secretariat. Policy, process, that's
your world.
That's my world, and then suddenly to come to presidential, and I asked the same question as you. How does it work? I mean, I knew how it worked in Secretariat because the associate secretaries all get regions of the world, whereas as a general vice president, you're invited to work with various departments. So for me, I was invited to work with women's ministries, education, religious liberty and PAR, and Adventist Possibility Ministries. And then because of my work with education, I get to chair the board at IAS in the Philippines. That's a GC institution. And then I was invited also to chair the White Estate. So that technically is not part of the General Conference. It's a separate organization. But I was invited to be the chair of the White Estate, which is an incredible privilege. To be involved with Ellen White's legacy yeah.
So as we're wrapping up here, if there was like one thing from your story that you just kind of want others to know, what would it be?
That God is a God of possibilities. When I look back at the 17-year-old that went to Newbold, if someone had told her that she was going to end up as a General Conference vice president, she would have laughed and told them, it's never going to happen in a million years. But, as I look back on my life, I see God has opened doors, created possibilities, taken me to places, given me opportunities that I never dreamed of. And I would say, commit your life to God and be prepared to go on the greatest adventure that anyone can ever go. Because He has things in mind for you that are far greater than you can ever dream or imagine. And the adventure with him it's just great. So I would say whatever door God opens, hold his hand, have courage, go through it, and be prepared to be just blown away by his goodness.
Audrey, thank you so much. I was excited for this just because I feel like I've been so blessed personally by your mentorship over the last, I guess it's been a year and a half. It feels like it's been so much longer in the best ways, but I've been so blessed by it. And I couldn't wait for people to get to know you because I just feel like the more we understand who people are, the more blessed we are by hearing their experiences and learning from them. And I feel like there's so much hope in your story. You know, you were this young woman who wanted to work for the church, but God had this other unique path that you were able to walk with him, but still gave you all the gifts and talents and skills that you needed to serve his church right now. And I want to thank you for allowing the Holy Spirit to lead you. And I'm also really grateful that you had such an incredible husband who, when you kind of would push back and be reticent to do something, he knew the call of God himself.
Oh, he did.
And he wasn't going to allow you to not answer that call. And that's actually it's a beautiful thing for those of us who are married, to make sure that we pray and we talk with our spouses and we listen to hear what God is saying to them, sometimes about our own callings, because maybe sometimes he's speaking through our own spouses, because sometimes he has a hard time getting through to us. But
yes, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't met my husband. I mean, of that I have no doubt. I also know that, you know, we make mistakes. We do things in a less than perfect way. You know, I mean, I say now looking back, and the way I cringe at the way I think I said no when they offered me the job as a Bible worker. Yeah, I do. I cringe. But, you know, the Lord took all of my inadequacies and all of my imperfections and my impatience and everything else, and he still worked with me. And he has endless patience. And, you know, the walk with him is just, he is good. I'm just excited every day to get up, see what he has in store.
Such a promise for all of us. We hope you enjoyed this episode of A&N Profiles with our guest, Audrey Andersson. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast or YouTube channel, wherever it is that you're tuning in from today. We don't want you to miss any future episodes. Thank you for spending this time with us. We know your time is precious. Join us next week as I continue to get to know the life stories of more inspiring people.